Hey everybody, welcome to the Facebook Live NSPS Q&A. We are so stoked that you're here, and as we're getting started, we're going to take just a couple minutes and just chit chat before things really get moving.
Well, we've had great weather here in Seattle.
Yeah, I was expecting rain and clouds, and it's been sunny here for 3 days straight.
Yeah.
Well, as dealers, you guys got to be excited because here's all these opportunities for dealers to come right to the panel and ask questions and get excited about getting straight answers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We were talking yesterday because we had the affiliate meeting yesterday for the HPVA, and we had a panel that was like a manufacturers panel talking about NSPS and a lot of other government affairs things. I felt like there were so many good questions that were asked. I'm really stoked for today.
100%. There was no bad question either. And that's a big emphasis here. Is so many detailed questions that were answered, and all those rumors and myths and that type of stuff were kind of kiboshed there. I think we know where we stand, so it's exciting to discuss that.
Yeah. So we'll do this as people are coming online. I'm going to get signed on my phone right here, so that way we can take a look at the questions. Rachel just got LASIK, so she can read everything on the computer screen up there, but I'll have to get signed in on my phone to do this.
Yeah, you guys might be treated to see me do drops on Facebook Live today.
There you go. As people are waiting to get started, we'll introduce ourselves here in just 1 second. But for those of you that don't know, Chris Neufeld, the man, the myth, the legend. What was your journey into getting into NSPS? Can you kind of just fill us in of how this has gone for you?
I feel like Dirty Harry by that introduction. I started in the stove business many years ago, 25 plus years ago, but specifically in November of 2009, NSPS discussion started in Portland, Oregon, 3 hours south of here, and for nearly a decade now it's been going on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and it started.
That sound is a little bit soft. I don't know if you've seen that comment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so they can barely hear us.
Okay. Let's
Get closer to
What is the red?
let's do this. Hold on. So for the people listening out there, does that sound get any better? Grant's got that live feed going.
Well, we should be talking, so they
Yeah,
can
that's
finish
right.
that.
Oh, it's a delay.
There's
Yeah.
the delay, yeah. All right.
I think we just maybe scoot a little bit closer.
Yeah, that's
so
fine.
We can talk more directly.
Now, and we'll talk loud too. Grant, I got to tell you, I feel like I'm like Mr. Tech Guy setting this thing up, but I can't get the comments on my phone. Can you find it for me? Well, we are really excited that you guys are here. As we start to get rolling, NSPS is one of those things where there's been a lot of misinformation, and I think it's just good to get the actual experts here to talk about it. You can get answers from the horse's mouth. And my journey has been so funny because as I've been getting more and more involved. Oh, perfect. So as I've been getting more and more involved with the HPVA, I've been realizing just how complicated the NSPS is. And there's still people, even yesterday as we were going through the Q&A for the HPVA affiliate meeting, there's people within my own company that are like, well, wait, I didn't know that. And so I feel like, well, hey, if this is how it is, even in my own company, we got to start talking about this to dealers everywhere, since we've got a year and a week from today to plan it. So, okay, perfect. Well, it looks like we got 23, 24 dealers that are watching across the country now. I know there's going to be more that come in. As we jump into this, first of all, we want to say thank you. That I think that as we look at NSPS, this is something that, even though the implications are ridiculous of what's going to happen with it, I do think that this, in the last 6 months, has started to bring our industry together in a way that has not happened, at least in the time that I've been in it. And so I just want to give kudos to everybody that's watching, and then also to you guys here at the table for being a voice in the industry that are helping dealers do what they need to win in spite of NSPS. So with all that, purpose of today, live Q&A. So for everybody that's watching, please just start writing in your questions just as we speak right now. Just start writing them in, and me and Grant have those going. And so we'll take a look and see what we can do to help you guys out. But I want to go around the room and give an introduction here. So I guess since I'm yapping my mouth the most, I'll get started. So my name is Tim Reed. I'm the president of the Oregon Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association. And I'm also the retail sales leader for Fireside Home Solutions in the Pacific Northwest. So we have 6 retail showrooms that I'm over. And so we sell fireplaces, wood stoves, the whole gamut of hearth products. And I've been in this industry now for 15 years. It's been about 4 years as an installer, spent some time as a service tech, and then now I've done sales and some leadership as well. And just excited to be here and a part of this.
Well, I'm Chris Neufeld, Vice President, Blaze King Industries. I'm also the co-chair of the solid fuel section for HPVA, as well as a member of the Government Affairs Committee for HPVA. I've been involved and attended virtually every meeting on this topic since 2009. And thank you, Delta, for doing a great job getting me there.
Great pitch, Chris. My name is Rachel Feinstein. I'm with the Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association. I'm the Senior Manager of Government Affairs. I've been with HPVA for a little under 8 years now. I do most of our Hill lobbying in Washington, D.C., and organize our grassroots networks across the country. Also, I'd like to note that all 3 of my fellow panelists here are graduates of HPVA's Government Affairs Academy, which is really our organization's leadership training program.
Yeah.
So, Grant.
So my name is Grant Falco. I run a retail store in Spokane, Washington. It's a 4th generation family-owned business. In Spokane, we've been dependent on wood stoves for 40 years, and the birth of Quaterfire and Blaze King are near us, and it's a big part of what we do. And we're very passionate about wood, and we want to get the true message out there. So that's what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as we're going through talking, obviously we got a microphone here. If you're having a hard time hearing anybody, just write that into a comment. I talk really loud anyway, so I don't think you'll have to ask me about that. But as people are watching here, can you guys write in? Where is everybody from that's watching this? Who do we have here? I'm looking here. It looks like we got Harvey Gale. So we got Salem, Oregon represented. Where else do we have across the country? Ooh, looks like we got Mr. Art Ratcliffe, the Art Ratcliffe.
Well,
First question.
oh, great.
Ooh, okay, we got Bill Caldwell from Ohio. What's up, Bill? Thanks for tuning in.
Lakefield, Minnesota.
Ooh, Kyle Quinn from Canada. We got the Canadians represented.
Hey,
Hey, that's right. That's right.
Nice.
New Hampshire.
Wow. Yeah, PNW.
Our Pacific Northwest.
That's right. That's right.
For those out east that don't know.
That's right. In the Pacific Northwest. Well, hey, we are really thankful. So as we keep talking here, please keep writing the questions in. We also have some questions that have been sent in ahead of time, and with that, I think that we'll get rolling with this. So, here we go. Vanessa from Southern California with Napoleon. Peter, Oxford, New York. Great job.
See the question above from Peter Faber, Tim?
Yeah. So let's start this out. So Peter writes in, and he's got a question that says, "Can I put a sign on a built-in fireplace that says not for sale, display model only?" I'm going to kick that over to Mr. Chris Neufeld.
Well, I knew the subject of fireplaces would come up because I don't make that product category. But I did reference the NSPS rule, and there are specifically 3 things that define a fireplace. Now, anything that's flush with the wall that burns wood that you stick into a wall could be considered a fireplace, a manufactured fireplace. In fact, there are those that are fireplaces and those that look like fireplaces. So within the rule, there's a definition of what a fireplace is. It can't have certain things, like it cannot be able to regulate the burn rate. You can't do it by either air in or air out. And there's other things that are control measures that say this is a fireplace. For those that don't meet that, they're an affected facility. They're actually a wood heater under the AAA subpart. And therefore, those units, if you speak to the manufacturers, which I would encourage you to do, those units are regulated. If you're willing to eat the cost of that unit down the road and realize that as of May 15th, 2020, you can never sell that product, then you should speak to your manufacturer about that and say, do you encourage me to put in a new version, or should I label this not for sale and realize I can never ever sell that? I can't even give it away. That would be a violation of federal law. So that's up to the dealer to make that decision working with their manufacturer. I spoke to 2 leading fireplace manufacturers in advance of this to make sure I had a clear understanding of that. And both of them encouraged the dealers to talk with the company or the rep and say, look, I've got this unit. It's a regulated heater. It's subject to the rule. What do you think I should do? So I defer to the manufacturer on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I'm going to piggyback on that because one that we get all the time here is, well, can't we just burn a fire in a step 1 stove to make it used and then sell it as a used stove? Can you do that, Chris?
You cannot do that. So
Despite what people are saying, I can't do that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
As of recently, 2 weeks ago, when I was in the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska, an individual rep had traveled around and told dealers just burn a fire in them and they become used stoves. In fact, that's not true.
Nope.
They have to have a chain of non-commercial ownership. A retailer is a commercial owner. Mrs. Smith that you sold the stove to is a non-commercial owner. If she brings back a stove to you that she's had for 4 or 5 years, that's a chain of non-commercial ownership. That doesn't fall under the purview of the new source performance standards. The new source performance standards only apply to new source. They don't affect what's in people's homes. Those are grandfathered in. They can't be touched. But you should be cognizant that if you're selling used stoves, you also have to be aware of what your state or region also has as requirements. Washington State is very particular about that. So you have to be aware of the laws for your state.
And so we have a question to piggyback on that. So Brent from Rochester, Minnesota writes in. So he says, it's a 2-part question. Part 1, can we install a regulated unit that does not meet 2020 if we didn't sell it, i.e. if the customer already owns it? Can he sell that?
Well, he called me last week. Good morning, Brent.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, as I said earlier, whether it's a fireplace or wood heater, if it's a regulated product and it does not meet the requirements of the 2020 NSPS for step 2, you must sell it by a certain time frame. And if you choose not to sell it, then you're going to absorb that loss because you can never do anything with it. And if you're looking to replace that unit, I would contact the manufacturer and say, listen, I have XYZ product on my floor. I want to replace it. How can you help me with that? That's what I would do.
Yeah.
What was the second part?
So part 2 of that, sorry, I'm getting distracted here in the chat, is can private citizens sell regulated units after the deadline?
Private citizens can sell wood stoves all they want, but they cannot non-commercial owner, but they cannot manufacture and sell stoves.
Got it.
Okay, so they can make a stove for themselves. Good luck getting homeowners insurance, but you cannot manufacture and sell. So Washington State is very particular on this matter. In fact, they watch Craigslist, they watch eBay, and in the state of Washington, it is a state violation to exchange ownership of a heater that does not meet Washington State requirements. I didn't say sell, I said exchange ownership. That means you can't trade, bargain, do anything with it.
We got another question. Can you install an unregulated unit if you didn't sell it?
Let Rachel answer that.
If you can, let's see the question again here. Can we install a regulated unit that does not meet the 2020 standard if we did not sell it? If the customer already owns it? If the customer already owns it, then I would say it's already in the hands of a non-commercial owner. There are some states where you're allowed to, I forget what the provision is called, but you're allowed to install a product for like a friend or a family member or something.
Yep.
This is more a licensing issue potentially, but if it's already owned by a non-commercial owner, I would think it would be fine.
Yeah. So here's a question that I want to ask. So, there's rumored to only be one EPA enforcement guy for the entire country. So what's the likelihood that EPA actually shows up at my business and knocks on my door? I want to kick that to Mr. Grant Falco.
So yesterday in our NSPS panel and discussion and recent podcast that we discussed, I've been visited by EPA on 2 different occasions, and on one occasion, I think it was the Department of Ecology that was with them, and so I think the highlighted point there is there's more than just one person. And in working in that situation, it wasn't a negative situation at all. It was actually a very positive educational visit. I felt empowered after they left because of the information that they gave me. But there are some certain things that you want to know as they do visits, such as manuals with units.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal. And Chris, yesterday, I think in the discussion, kind of explained why that was so important. Can you kind of add to that?
Grant, we got Heidi saying to speak up just a little bit.
Okay.
So do you want me to answer? that?
Yes, so Grant asked the question about, there's kind of the misinformation. Why do manuals have to be with units? He's been visited twice by the EPA, and you were saying that they've been pretty reasonable. It hasn't been contentious or anything like that.
Yeah, so the whole thing is I think it's EPA and there's an EPA jacket and it's federal and it's a little bit nerve wracking when they first walk in, but man, it was all education, and I accepted it with open arms, and it was a pretty enlightening experience. And I think empowering is what I said. I think the really important thing was the education of the manuals and kind of what the importance of having those with each and every unit. We had at that time close to 24 wood stoves on the floor, and we had to orchestrate having manuals readily available for them.
Yep, that's what the language says. Operation manuals must be readily available to the consumer with each model in your showroom.
Yeah, and this is something too that I wanted to talk about that, and I didn't even realize this. I always knew that you're supposed to have manuals inside of the stoves, but I didn't realize until yesterday that's federally regulated. So if you want your business to survive an EPA inspection, unscathed, you got to make sure every single stove has the manual in it. And Chris, that's a federal regulation, isn't it?
Yeah, in 2015, when the rule came out, it specifically stated that the manuals are now regulated.
Yeah.
And so we do the manuals go to the test labs, the manuals are submitted along with your request for certification of the heater. And real quick, this is wood and pellet.
Yeah.
We keep talking about wood.
Yeah.
This is solid fuel. It's wood and pellet.
And central heaters as well.
Yep.
And to go back to your question, Tim, I think it's important to know it's just not one person from EPA that is visiting everybody. And to think that they're not going to visit you, I think is silly. We have to prepare as if they're coming. And I believe that there's even a phone number available where
Anonymous people can call in and basically get you audited.
So yeah, the troops are on the ground, and it's not just one person from EPA. But I think in highlighting the visit, it was a very positive experience. And I would say prepare for the visit. Ask the questions now on what you need to be prepared for. But they were really trying to educate us when visiting, and like I said, it was a really good situation.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a bad interaction, and especially at this point. I mean, Chris, you've talked about this. That so far, I mean, every interaction with EPA seems like it's a positive thing where they're trying to educate and promote, and the whip has not been cracked yet. Is that fair?
That's fair. I don't know of a single violation written to a retailer within the purview of the NSPS by the EPA or any other. Again, they can delegate that authority. I don't know of any written ones. There are certainly warnings, that you should have your manuals with your appliances to make sure that the labels on the permanent labels on the stoves are visible. There's certain things that they look for, and they'll work with you at this point. I would be very clear that after May 15th of 2020, there will be a great deal of pressure from states and other vested people in the state and government organizations for EPA to do enforcement action.
Yeah.
So at this point, pay heed.
And whatever you do, if you receive an enforcement visit from EPA or a state air agency that's been delegated authority to do that enforcement visit, whatever you do not kick them out of your store. If they find something in your store that is incorrect, that shouldn't be there, or there's something wrong, stay calm, try to answer their questions as best as you can, be apologetic, and show that you're working in good faith, and that you're a good industry participant.
Well, we have a great question here that Peter's asking us, and he said, how do you put a manual in the burn model?
It just has to be accessible. So we put them behind the signage display in our showroom, and that was completely reasonable with the EPA. So yeah, it just doesn't have to be specifically with the unit, but within reason. It can't be in the back room or in a shelving storage or something like that.
You asked me, why is it necessary to do that? And the answer I gave yesterday, I think, is the most logical answer. And I've talked with some people at EPA, and it makes sense. So if you're a retailer and you're engaged with a customer and you're talking about different products in the showroom, and then you get a phone call, or for some reason you're distracted and taken away from that conversation, and then you come back to that same couple that are shopping and they've made a decision. They say, Tim, we've decided to buy this unit from you. during your absence, did they have all the information necessary to make that decision? So when the rule came out in 2015, it required us to put the efficiencies and emissions and CO numbers in the owner's manual. So now while you're engaged with the phone call or whatever takes you away from the conversation, that information's there for the consumer to make that more informed buying decision.
Sure. It's light reading, you know.
It is very light. It's prominent in every manual, and the consumer, if they want it, it's there.
Yeah, this is a great question that Brent's asking, and Rachel, I'm going to ask you this.
Sure.
Does HPVA have a checklist for dealers that will get them
Yes.
ready for an EPA visit?
For an EPA visit, not specifically, but we do have a retailer, we call it retailer must knows on our website. We have a full FAQ page trying to address some of these questions that you may have. Also, we have a great labeling document on our website, a 2-pager on the different kinds of labels that you'll see on different types of wooden pellet stoves, and which ones are step 1, which ones are step 2, and how to tell the difference between the two. So I encourage you to go to our website under the Government Affairs tab, NSPS, and you'll see a host of links there that'll get you to those resources that we have for you.
Well, okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to put Rachel on the spot right now in front of the whole country, okay? You ready for this?
Okay, ready.
I'm going to say this, that HPVA will put together a document for dealers of, if you get an inspection, here are the things that you should have ready. And I think I can say that we'll put this together and we will send that out.
Yes.
Is that
we
fair?
will. That's fair. And we'll link to it in the follow-up of this.
You heard it here. You heard it here.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I want to get clarification to Peter on the burn models versus static models. So like we just treat it the same. So we have burn models and static models on the showroom floor, and everything has a manual behind the signage. And so it's within a couple feet of the unit. Now, if you're talking about a burn model that is used to heat, I don't know if that's what the question is in reference to, but I think you would still want, if it's ever going to be for sale, if you ever plan on selling it, you have to have the manual behind the unit.
Well, and the nuance to this is that Peter's asking, you know, can the manual for the burn model be in the back room while all the static models have the manuals present? And I think that the answer would be no. The manual must be readily available to the consumer, not to you, to the consumer.
Correct.
So it's got to be, you know, put it behind the brochures or something like that.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, it's gonna be ready. That's a great question. Thank you for that, Peter. All right, hey, so I want to do this. Keep writing questions in, but Rachel did something awesome yesterday that we called rumor or truth.
Yes.
And so what she's going to do here is she is going to read us a statement, and I want everybody listening to this to either write in rumor or truth, and then we're gonna jump into what that is.
Yes. So here's our first rumor. If I sell pellet stove models that are certified now, but used to be exempt, but it's the exact same model, I can still display the old version.
Ooh, okay, so read that one more time out loud.
Yep.
Everybody listen to this.
If I sell pellet stove models that are certified now, but used to be exempt, but it's the exact same model, I can still display the old version.
What do you guys think? Is that rumor? Is that true? This is a big deal. I mean, that's a legit question.
You're not
Yeah.
asking us.
I'm
You're
here to
asking
know.
those.
Yeah. Okay, so we got people. What's the answer to that?
The answer is no. That's exactly what EPA is looking for in their enforcement visits.
Good job, Joel. You got that one.
This has been one of the things that have come up in some of the enforcement visits where they found a pellet stove as a display, or some that were still in the back room that were retested by the manufacturer to meet step 1, or maybe it met step 2 when they tested it, but it was previously exempt and was not tested. You get rid of those. You do not want to be caught in a bind with those in your store.
Yeah, and so kudos. Joel, you get 1 point. Brent, you get a gold star. Richard, you get a gold star. Nate Hughes, good job, guys. You guys are doing really well there. Rachel, give us another, fact or fiction.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. Here's a good one. I can just get a new label from the manufacturer to put on the product I currently have. If the model was tested, unchanged, and past step 2, I should just be able to switch out the label for the correct one.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, people are thinking about that. Read it one more time.
Sure. I can just get a new label from the manufacturer to put on the product I currently have. If the model was tested, unchanged, and passed step 2, I should just be able to switch out the label for the correct one.
Okay, and it looks like we've got, okay, Brent says fiction, Joel says nope. What's the answer there?
They are both correct. You cannot do this. The manufacturer cannot do this. Technically, the label on the back of the stove is owned by the test lab, and it's explicitly said in the final rule of the NSPS that the label must be permanently affixed to the unit. So you cannot take this label off.
Yeah, and gotta give kudos. So we got some smart people listening to this. So Brent says that's fiction. Bill says it's fiction. Adam, rumor. Heidi says it's false. Extremely false. Yeah, Robert, thank you. You know, we got Richard Hughes saying it's a rumor. That is the correct information. Now I want to go back, and before we go to the next one for Rachel, we had a couple questions that we missed.
Yeah.
So Adam writes in, and Adam says, has there been anything definitive on the potential for a dealer's sell-through period? This is a question that everybody's asking. Rachel?
This was going to be my next rumor to address.
Okay, perfect.
The sell-through is absolutely not a certain thing. It's become a very challenging process with EPA. They in November 2018, they published a proposed rule proposing sell-through for just hydronic heaters and furnaces. They did not even propose it for wooden pellet stoves. HPVA and hundreds of retailers and manufacturers submitted extensive comments to EPA, urging them to provide sell-through for all products impacted by the NSPS, and to do so as quickly as possible. We've worked with several congressional offices on sending letters to EPA to put them on notice that Congress is watching and that they need to act on sell-through for all products and do so, again, as quickly as possible. EPA expected to be finished with reviewing comments on the sell-through proposal several weeks ago, and nothing has moved yet. So I think as we get further along in the year, it becomes more and more unlikely for us to get any sell-through relief, if even in time, for it to have any meaningful impact. It's not for lack of trying. We've tried very hard to move this, but can only work through a bureaucracy so much and get something done.
I mean, speaking as from a dealer, you have to anticipate there is no sell-through. And
yeah, plan as if there's not.
Absolutely. We need to be making plans and preparation as if they're not. And even if we do get word, we might not get word up until the very 11th hour. And so it really doesn't help because we might not get it and we can't be in that position. So your plan needs to start now. Yeah.
And one thing I will say with this, you know, my eyes have been open in the last year to the work that HPVA has done, and Grants has too. So I'm going to talk about the Government Affairs Academy for just 1 second. So in July, me and Grant went to the HPVA Government Affairs Academy in DC. And I'm telling you, for anybody that's listening, you need to go to this. It is the leadership training academy of our industry. And we spent 3 days in DC in the classroom, basically learning about how government works. I mean, we had to read the Constitution as preparation for it. And it's so silly that, like, you know, we grew up in this country, but we actually don't understand how our government works. And so the reason I'm saying this is that when me and Grant were there, you know, we spent 3 days learning just all kinds of stuff about how lobbying works, what HPVA is going after, what they're trying to do. And then we actually spent a day on Capitol Hill, and me and Grant are wearing suits, shaking hands with senators, having real conversations about this. And, you know, for years now, HPVA has been doing all kinds of grunt work to win legislation to help, you know, alleviate this burden from manufacturers and dealers. Unfortunately, the government shutdown kind of killed the last ditch effort that we had. We were almost across the finish line. But the thing that I want people to understand is that, you know, you sometimes get folks saying, well, hey, you know, what have you been doing about it? And my thing is like, well, they've been doing everything, you know, and I can say firsthand that, like, we were there shaking hands with senators talking about this, that, like, the effort has been there.
I was born and raised in this industry, and I had no idea what was going on the other side. And I actually feel guilty still to this day when I think about it, because there's people that walk around this trade show that you see all the time. You have no idea what they're doing, and they are there every day fighting for our industry. It also enlightened me on how, as I've grown up, you think your voice is really small, but, you know, it was empowering as an advocate for our industry and realizing that you do have power at a local level and giving you the tools to utilize that. And again, preparing you when you are called into action when needed.
Advocacy and lobbying is, I don't know if anyone knows this, it's it's protected by the First Amendment. It's a First Amendment right to lobby on behalf of your organization, on behalf of your business, on behalf of an industry. It's a First Amendment right. You have a voice. I speak at affiliate meetings throughout the spring and summer. I remember last year a member said to me, you know, Rachel, I'm just a business owner. Congress isn't going to listen to me. I'm just trying to defend my business. And I told him, you're a business owner. You have a right to defend your business. You are the best advocate there can be because you're on the ground. You know what's going on. I want to say with the legislation that we worked on last session of Congress was the furthest any legislation that we've worked on solely has gone. We passed the House of Representatives, which is a huge deal. We made it through the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Then at the end of the year, we needed a funding bill to ride out of the Senate on, and it just didn't materialize. As many of you might remember, part of our government shut down at the end of 2018 and into 19 because they couldn't come together with a spending bill. And then the session ended, and we would have had to start all over again from the very first step of introduction. No bill came together for us to exit the Senate.
Yeah, I want to get back to a question that we
Sure.
skipped from Robert, and this is a great one here. He says, do we still need to have the old hang tags on models that we still might have that were manufactured prior to 2015?
You're not required to have a hang tag anymore. If it came with the model, I would just keep it with it, I would say. But you're not required anymore to have a hang tag.
It's kind of, I think, the same thing as the manual is now, and the manual has replaced that. But if you have units that have hang tags, I think I would just be compliant and keep it there. I mean, you're going to make, if you get visited and you have the hang tags and manuals, and it's going to look good for you and look good for our industry, and we want it to be prepared as possible.
Yep.
Let me clarify. The rule says you don't have to have hang tags anymore. So you don't have to have hang tags. The EPA has offered manufacturers who have appliances that meet 2020 compliance a process to obtain a voluntary hang tag.
But not all of them have that.
Correct. You have to apply for it.
Yep.
And at this point in time for the retailer, you may not want to display that because you have product you need to sell from step one.
Yeah.
So you don't want to create confusion in the marketplace with your deal with your customers. You just want them to come in and get the proper heating appliance for their application. So I don't see very many voluntary hang tags out there. There might be a few, but generally speaking, there are no hang tags required.
Okay, and just to circle back on this, because I know that it was a great question that got asked, the likelihood of sell-through. So we are saying don't plan on it, but to be fair, HPVA, there are still a couple angles that you're trying to work.
Yes.
And so, you know, as a retailer, plan on it as if it's not going to be there.
Do not think optimistically about this. Do not pick the more optimistic outcome that you think is going to happen. Plan on not having sell-through. You have a business, you have to make that business decision.
Yep. And so what I want to ask next is going to be this, and this is going to go to Grant. So, you know, when you think about this, so I've got 6 retail showrooms in the Pacific Northwest. Grant, you got a very successful business in Spokane. Wood's a huge part, Pellet's a huge part of what you do, being out in the rural areas. For retailers that are listening here that are sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got 50, 75, 100, 200 step one stoves. What should a retailer be doing right now to plan to get that stuff out in time to be compliant?
I think it depends on your business. It depends on the inventory amount. It depends on how prevalent wood is for you. But the first thing you need to do is you need to get educated as much as you can, and being, you know, watching this video or Q&A and just earning for that information, seeking that information, and understanding exactly what is going on here. I think the next thing is get an intimate relationship with your inventory. And I say intimate because that's realistically what needs to happen. It was overwhelming when I had to start planning for this. I realized the task was in inventory. How do you start with something? We just took a list of the oldest units to newest units and just started knocking them off, and have continued to knock them off. Everybody's going to do it a little bit differently, but you have to have a plan now and try to sell your wood stoves now to get through the rest of the season. And your plan is specific to you. The important thing is you have to be intentional with knowing your inventory and coming up with that plan to survive the NSPS.
Yep. And so like what we've done, so we have stores in Washington and in Oregon. And in Oregon right now, we're actually in really good shape. We're down to like 10 units. It's not that many, but it's because we've been proactive ahead of time. And talking to people, this is not the way that most companies are. I mean, just there's a lot of companies that have tons and tons of products. So what we've done to do that is, like Grant said, intimate knowledge of your inventory. So for us, it was, okay, how many cast iron stoves do we have? How many steel? How many soapstone? How many inserts? How many? And literally, you know, you get them all up on the wall of your office and you say, hey, this week we're knocking out these ones. Then this week we're knocking out these ones. And you got to be radically focused on that. And that's helped us. But I would hope that you guys have something similar that you're doing, being really intentional with your inventory, because there are a lot of dealers that have tons of stoves and you've got a year and a week to get those out.
And there's stages to this process. It's first about you, and then it becomes about your industry. So you come up with a plan for yourself, and then you get to this point where you have to start ordering product and realizing that your distributors and our manufacturers have the same problem. So whatever your plan is, work with your sales reps and manufacturers reps on their plan, because we have to remove this inventory. So I would highly encourage you to work on a plan together. Once you get your stuff, and I would focus selfishly as a dealer first, but once you get to that ordering, you want to be in conjunction. Just don't stop ordering stuff. Don't stop selling wood stoves. We can't, as an industry, afford for anybody to do that.
And keep one thing in mind too. This is the first time there's been an NSPS, a federal NSPS, without a sell-through.
Yeah.
And without that sell-through, it's not business as usual. You can't say that last year I sold this many stoves and that's how my business is going to flow, because you have competitors. You have other fireplace shops and retailers that also have the inventory. And that is going to put a downward pressure on you, on your pricing, as well as how you order and everything else.
Yep.
So it's not business as usual.
And I want to emphasize again something that Grant mentioned. Don't just stop ordering step one product. Don't order 20 models, 20 units, but you can continue ordering step one models maybe as you get orders in. But manufacturers need that revenue, and you need that revenue to continue working on the process of R&D and testing for step two products. I think testing for a single model can sometimes cost as little as $20,000 per test.
As little, yep. And I want to throw something out too. This actually is going to be a shout out to Daniel Hammer from Sutter in the NWHPVA meeting yesterday. He had a great suggestion he gave out. So if you're a dealer that's starting to get to the point where you're in good shape, where you're lower on your inventory, his recommendation was, well, maybe what you could do is you could sell your floor model maybe at a discounted rate a year ahead of time. So get it sold. The customer is going to get it, right before the date, and then order in, 2 to 3 stove increments from your manufacturers and your distributors. Keep the inventory low so the risk is low, but your floor model is already sold. I thought that was a great, practical tip.
Like have the floor model sold, but keep it in there and,
Yeah,
and don't remove it until the end of the season.
Exactly. You pre-sell it, maybe it's at a little bit discounted rate, so the consumer knows that they get a good deal, but they got to wait however long, 10 months for it. And I think that's something practical that works really well. Chris, you had a suggestion from a dealer in California that worked really well, right?
Yes, A1 stoves. They did a blue dot, green dot. And I've seen this happening all over the U.S. now because I've been talking about it on our podcasts and stuff. The idea is that every heater that you have in your shop that is subject to this rule, that must be sold by May 15th of 2020, you take a little dime-sized yard sale sticker and you put it on the static glass of the glass of the static display model. And basically a green dotted stove, both there on the floor and in the back room, is a stove that has to be sold by the deadline. He chose blue as cool. I don't have to sell that one. And he puts a blue dot on the ones that meet 2020 compliance. That has allowed him to vastly manage his product inventory. You get excited in the showroom. You have a customer standing in front of you. They're ready to invest in a relationship with you and buy a product that's going to last them perhaps their lifetime. You get excited and you might order one and you didn't check to see if you had one in the back room, or maybe as Daniel Hammer pointed out, sell them that one on the floor, get yourself either the replacement version of that same stove from your manufacturer as a step 2 heater, or put on a step 2 heater from another supplier, whatever it is. But continue to do business with every one of the people you do business with. Just do it in a very managed way so that your inventory is well managed.
Yeah, and I'll say this. So me and Grant and Chris did a podcast the other day talking about this, and I'll preface this, that I am not trying to put words in anybody's mouth. But if you think about this, if you're a distributor or a manufacturer and you've got hundreds of step 1 products and your dealers say, I'm not selling them, what are you going to do? You're going to start selling direct to consumer. You have to. And so I'm just saying that as dealers, what we have to be thinking about is that it's not just about us. That obviously, like Grant said, shore up our inventory first, but after that, start having conversations with your manufacturers and your distributors. How can we share the risk to where we're getting this stuff out of here, but everybody wins? And in the last 3 months, before May 15th, 2020, I think that we're going to be seeing things that we've never seen before as far as price slashing, internet sales, direct to consumer. And the reason that we're having this conversation now, a year and a week ahead of time, is so that we can be proactive so that everybody wins and the market stays fair, as opposed to people start going out of business and start alienating each other because everyone's in a panic. Yeah.
100%.
So, okay, so we have some more questions here that I want to jump into. This is a really good one. So are all stoves that have weighted grams per hour of 2.0 or less automatically step 2?
No, they're not.
But Chris, isn't that the regulation?
So in advance of the rule in 2015, with the understanding that the new standard would be 2.0, many manufacturers tested their wood heaters under method 28, and they got them certified at below 2 grams an hour, 2 grams and under. When the rule came out on March 16th of 2015, there was a revision to the method. It's ever so slight, but the revision states that the rule states that the test method is now method 28R, meaning revised. So as a manufacturer who had many units, and Travis Industries had many units as well, others did, that were below 2.0, we all had to recertify them. So it is entirely possible that you have a step 2, appearing to be a step 2 heater of 2.0 or less, but the only way you're going to know for certain is to read that permanent label. If it does not say this meets 2020 compliance, then it's got to go.
Yep.
No matter its grams per hour.
Yep. So just to be clear, just because it's under 2 grams an hour doesn't mean it's 2020 compliant, because it may not have been tested with 28R. It might have been tested with 28, which was the old method.
Right.
The method has been revised, so that's why something that has been whatever 1.6 or 1.9, it's not 2020 compliant because it did not pass the new test.
Yep. Again, look at the label on the back of the product. If it doesn't say that it can be sold after May 15th, 2020, I think the language will say something like may be sold after May 15, 2020, or certified to compliance of the 2020 standards or step 2 standards. Look at the label, and again, we have that labeling document on our website, and we'll provide a link in the feedback for this Facebook Live session.
So another reason that it's imperative to actually look at the physical label on the unit is that manufacturers have retested appliances that meet compliance for 2020, and it may appear on the EPA list that is now a 2020 unit. But many manufacturers have distributors or warehouses, and they have inventory. So just because a certain brand X, certain model Y is on the list, and you said this is now a 2020 heater, it's entirely possible that without looking at the label, visually the unit looks the same. Many stoves look the same as they did between 28 and 28R. You actually want to make certain that you read the label, because you may have gotten a step 1 heater that was in stock from somewhere. The label is the only way to know for certain.
Well, when we were talking the other day, Chris, you had a story about a dealer that got 35 units in that they thought were step 2 because the model number was the same, but they came from a warehouse that had leftover step 1 product. Tell that story.
Well, it wasn't 35, it was 4.
Okay. I think you said, okay,
that was another dealer.
Okay.
That was another question.
Okay.
That was the person who had just got 35 step 1 heaters and said, I think I can sell all 35
Oh,
before
there
the
you
end of
go.
the year. And then they realized, wait, I have 9 competitors within 50 or 60 miles of me. They're slashing prices. I'm probably not going to sell 35 wood stoves this year. to the other one. That
Yeah.
was the individual who in Wisconsin had just gotten 4 units in. They were on pallets. They looked at the list. They talked to their rep. Yep, those are step 2 heaters. And I said, well, let's take a look at those. And we looked at the label, and not a single one of them was step 2.
Yep.
They had been retested. That model had been retested and met compliance, but they got older inventory.
Yep. Even though the model, if it was retested and passed step 2, you cannot sell the other units that are under that model line. Even though the latest one did pass step 2, you cannot sell that older inventory.
Yep, after the deadline.
After the deadline of May 15th.
And I know that we're repeating ourselves, but the guiding factor is the label on the back of the stove. If the label on the back of the stove does not say maybe sold after 2020, you can't do it. Period.
Yeah, so there's a possibility of 4 labels out there. One is a really bad one if you have it on your showroom floor and it says this is an exempt heater. You weren't supposed to have that on your floor after December 31, 2015. The second version is a stove that was manufactured, that's EPA approved, that was made and manufactured and shipped prior to the rule coming out in 2015. It says this meets 1990s EPA requirements because that's the last time that they did an NSPS, was 88 and step 2 and 90. The third version is this stove meets 2015 NSPS, and the wording will appear on there, may not be sold after May 15th of 2020. So there's a lot of confusion about labeling, but the brilliant thing is the 4th label. It says this meets 2020 compliance.
Yep.
If it doesn't say that, the other 3 don't matter. They got to go.
Yep. So I want to get back to a couple questions here. So Brent asked this. He asked a couple questions. Does NSPS affect site-built masonry heaters? And he clarifies. He's asking about when I was asking about whether site-built masonry heaters in 2020. He's thinking about something like Tula Kiwi, which has a UL label.
Masonry heaters are exempt still. Masonry heaters do not have a federal standard or a federal requirement. So masonry heaters, and there's a definition for what a masonry heater is. Look at that. They are not affected by this rule.
Okay. Now, one thing that we're talking about too is we're talking about what these labels look like. And Rachel, you've got a website. We'll say it out loud, and then we'll post the website in the notes. I don't know if they're able to see that screen.
It says bit.ly/NSPS, all caps, labels with a capital L, no space. And again, we'll put that on the feed here in a little bit, but you can download the 2-pager from there, and it shows you examples of what labels.
What the label should look like.
Yeah.
Yep. So one more here. So Danny Kaler writes in. Danny's my buddy down in Southern Oregon. What's up, Danny? He jumped on and just asked, well, hey, what about used stoves? Let me go back here real quick. He says, Grant, do you see
What
that
about used stoves sold by consumers?
There you go. Yeah. What about used stoves sold by consumers?
Used stoves are not affected by this rule. Again, it's a new source performance standard. A consumer can continue to sell a used stove if it was used by a non-commercial owner, which is a consumer.
There's one exception to that.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Washington,
Yes.
you cannot exchange ownership. They don't use the word sell. You cannot exchange ownership of a heater that does not meet Washington state requirements. It is a state violation.
Okay.
So check with your state laws as well as understanding what the federal requirements.
So I'm going to ask a question. I'm tipping my hat just because I'm from Oregon, but there are a couple states that have a rule in place where if you sell your house and you have a non-EPA certified stove, that stove must go with the home purchase. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. If you're in one of the states like mine that has that rule, Chris, does that mean that I have to have a 2020 compliant step 2 stove in order to sell my house? And if I have a step 1 stove, I have to throw it in the dumpster?
No, that's not a true statement.
Okay.
So the way that it works is that if you Google EPA approved wood stoves and you get to EPA.gov, there's a link on Google, you click it. At the bottom of that screen, you're going to see a PDF file for heaters. In fact, that list is most recently updated as of April. This is what it looks like. It's got green bars and non-green bars alike. And the idea behind that list is that is a list of stoves that were either deemed qualified or meet 2020 compliance. So if they're in a green bar, they meet 2020. Okay? If they're not, then they're greater than 2.0 or less than 2.0, but they were never tested to 28R and they're not compliant. Now, back to your question. So the person in Oregon or Colorado or where have you that has this process has to be very careful, because on the right-hand column of that same EPA page, it says historical list of certified heaters. So no, the stove does not have to be 2020 approved. It has to have been EPA approved. And if you don't go to the historical list, your stove might be 4.6 grams per hour. EPA removed any stove greater than 4.5 off that list and created a separate list called the historical list. You got to go to the historical list if you want to know if it's EPA certified as well.
Yeah. So just to be loud and clear, if you're in one of those states like Oregon or it sounds like Colorado,
Parts
parts of Colorado, is make sure that the stove is either listed on the EPA list or the historic list.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be removed from the house.
Correct.
Fair? Okay. Okay.
And thank you, Kyle Quinn, for posting the link
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Kyle just posted that, so you guys that are watching can get to see that. So one question that I wanted to ask here is we've talked around about this, but we haven't actually defined it in this specific Facebook Live Q&A. So the new standards, May 15th, 2020, is that in order to be compliant, stoves have to meet criteria based on one of two tests, either a Corewood test or a Corewood test. And Chris is the expert here, so correct me if I'm wrong, right? So stoves to be compliant, if they're being tested with Corewood, must be under 2.0 grams per hour, and under Corewood must be 2.5. I can't believe I got those numbers right.
You got it right.
I got them right.
I don't have anything to add.
Well, okay, so here's what I want to do though is I know people are going to ask this, why are there two tests and what is the difference between Corewood and Corewood?
So the test method 28 comes from Oregon originally, from the regulations.
That's a great state, I should have said.
Oh, yeah, okay, well, go Duck.
Oh, come on.
Sorry, Tim.
No, man.
So anyway, so Oregon started off regulating wood stoves before the EPA did, back in 1984, and they had a test method. They worked with industry, they worked with the labs, they worked with regulators, and the state came up with this method. That method later on became a federal method with some adaptations and revisions called Method 28. Method 28 specifically was designed to not necessarily crib fuel testing, wasn't designed to show how stoves perform in the real world. It was designed so you can compare one stove's performance to another stove's performance. It's fairly rigid in the way that it's performed. We use dimensional lumber. There's some oddities in the program, in the process. For example, in crib fuel testing, a certain size stove might use all 4x4s. And then depending on firebox volume, you might use a combination of 2x4s and 4x4s. And then even smaller yet, you might just have all 2x4s. So there's some issues there. But crib fuel was designed specifically with little cleats on it to provide spacing between all those pieces of wood to give good surface area exposure for good combustion. Corewood testing is a reference method that looks more like how a stove might perform in the real world. And thankfully, HPVA and other vested parties worked very, very hard on the ASTM method for testing wood heaters with Corewood. And EPA, thankfully, has granted applicable alternative test method dispensation to use the ASTM method for Corewood testing.
Yeah, and so just to explain, I think what you said is so critical to understand is that the test that we've used for years and years and years is crib fuel. And the Corewood test was never intended to show you how the stove will perform in the real world. It was to give you a controlled fuel that could compare stoves against each other.
Right.
That's very different than the real world. So it's still a very helpful test, but the heart behind Corewood is that we can actually start to test how does this work in a real life situation. Is that fair?
Yes, but within the Corewood, we're dealing with a lot of more variability in terms of the fuels that can be used. There's specific gravities that you need to meet. And so maybe a wood heater that tests with oak on the East Coast would be rated at X grams per hour or X level of efficiency. And on the West Coast, another manufacturer might use Doug fir. Well, actually, if Doug fir doesn't meet the standard. So you have to use specific fuels that meet the specific gravity within the ASTM test method. And so there's a little bit of confusion there too. So you have to be careful that the consumer understands when they come into your showroom grant that just because they're looking at one unit that was Corewood tested and gets X grams per hour, that's not necessarily how that stove's going to perform in the real world. It might be a closer indicator, but then there's also the customer who says to you, well, what's this crib fuel thing about? And so you have to be able to understand the difference there.
Yeah.
The risk is that some states provide incentives, either through stove changeouts or tax rebates or what have you, that reward you based on your score, right? And so there's the potential that you could, as a manufacturer, test with a fuel that gets you 1.9 grams per hour. And then another manufacturer tests with a different fuel and comes in at 1.5. And a state says the incentive is for stoves that are 1.5 and less. So that's kind of the problem. That's why crib fuel testing gave a more apples to apples comparison for purposes.
And something that I've seen in some change-out programs is they'll provide a greater incentive for stoves that are 2.0 grams an hour or less. And the change-out program will have a list of which stoves qualify. And there are stoves on that list that actually are not step 2. They've just taken all the stoves that are 2.0 grams or less. However, that leaves out any Corewood tested stoves that came in between 2.0 and 2.5.
Yeah.
EPA very arbitrarily picked 2.5 as a number. That was not based on data or test method, since there was no test method finalized at the time the rule was final in March 2015.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I want to point out too, so Rainbow Hearth and Home has a great comment. I'm just going to read this because this is really good. Most consumers do not yet understand 2020 compliance. It's our opinion that we shouldn't confuse them with this. It's not what they need right now. So sell your inventory and product as you always have. Don't confuse customers with, well, this is 2020 and this is not. This next piece is really good. 2020 compliance does not mean it is a better appliance.
Correct.
This could make a consumer wait to buy the following year thinking it's going to be better. And I think that goes back to what we talked about the other day on my podcast with Grant, talked about how cleaner burning does not mean better performing. Why don't you take that, Grant?
Well, yeah, I just, when a consumer comes into your showroom to look for a wood stove, there's a ton of different reasons: secondary heat, primary heat, backup heat, but they expect certain things from that wood stove. Heat output, on the high side, control of that heat, burn times, good draft or easy startup. And I walked this last trade show and I was sold on clean air over and over again, which I am all for and our industry is all for. But we have to realize that cleaner burning does not mean better performing, and we're changing. And there's some unproven products out there where I wasn't being sold performance. And I just want to be very clear. Cleaner burning does not mean better performing. And I think us as a dealer have to fully be aware of that.
And I've also seen some confusion with consumers who think that they have to have a step 2 appliance in their home, that they're not allowed to have a step 1 model at a certain point in time. There might be a state rule or a local law that is different than the federal requirement. You need to check with your state requirements. But the federal NSPS does not regulate products that are already in a home or that are in a home before May 15th, 2020.
I want to add into that observation that, and we talked about this yesterday in our annual meeting. Sure, not everybody in the public understands NSPS or 2020, but we have to be very clear about something. And that is, manufacturers in our industry have not always been very good at communicating with retailers. What I know, my retailers should know, because a consumer can call me in my office and I'm going to be truthful with them about our products and what this means, what that means to them. What's unfortunate is that when they walk into Grant's showroom and they've already talked to me and they ask Grant a question, he doesn't know the answer because I decided to parse the information. I think that's unfortunate. So the reason we're here today is to make sure you, the retailers, know the information you need to know, not because we're promoting talking about 2020. It's so that you can manage your inventories, work with your suppliers, help them move their product, and at the end of the day, everybody comes out a winner in this, as best as we can. The best thing that could happen is EPA would pick up the phone today and say, we've decided to give you sulfur.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not today, for sure.
Yep. And, so one question I have as we're getting towards the end here is, so say that we're coming up on May 2020 and you still have a couple stoves left in your barn, maybe you have 10, 20, 30. Can those be donated after the deadline?
They cannot be donated. You cannot do anything with them except make them boat anchors. One dealer did suggest to me recently that somewhere around February or March, he's going to be meeting with his accountant to see if he can take some kind of tax incentive or write-off for having donated them to charitable causes. So everybody's got some units in their showroom that are a little harder to sell than others. And you get down to the point where maybe there's better value as a donation for your tax purposes than trying to sell it for $400 or $500 or whatever.
But they cannot be, you cannot even give them away after May 15, 2020. You cannot donate them to Habitat for Humanity after May 15th, 2020. It's considered a transfer of ownership. You cannot transfer ownership of a product that does not meet step 2. If you're a commercial owner, you cannot do that.
Yeah. So we are almost at the time limit here. So we're coming right up on it. Everyone that's listening, if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and write them in now and we'll try to get to them. We just have a few minutes left, but you know, I want to say just thank you. I mean, I'm looking at, holy cow, how many people are watching this and participating, right? We got Peter, Joel, Angela, Brent, Danny, Art. I mean, like, this is amazing that we got people all, like right now, we have people all over this country in our industry that are coming together for this. And
North America.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, North America. We have
friends
we have friends in Canada too. You know, I want to say that you know, in a high tide, all ships rise, and you know, the effects of NSPS, they could be brutal. I mean, there is a huge risk with the way that this has gone about to businesses all over the country. That being said, I do believe that as an industry, we can come together. And as we're talking about this now, we've got a year and a week to deal with it. That's the reason that this whole podcast came together, is that I know it's Chris's idea to say, hey, you know, let's, or not podcast, Facebook Live. You know, Chris said, hey, you know, we're a year out from this. Grant, what can we do about it? And Grant hit me up and we said, well, let's call up Rachel. Like, let's get on Facebook Live and start to do this. And I want to say that I think there is an opportunity for our industry to become galvanized together and push through in a way that we've never had to before, being as fragmented as we are. Is that fair?
I agree.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, it looks like everybody's saying thanks.
Can I ask one last question? I know we talked about so much
Yeah.
the last few days. Fines at the end of this. We talked
Oh,
about,
yeah.
so we got to talk about what they are, what we're looking at, what do we think, you know, is realistic there.
So it's $2,500 per infraction per day for a retailer.
And that's, and per infraction means per unit.
Right.
In the warehouse or on the floor.
And it's per day that since whatever rule was in effect. So if you have a stove in your store June 1st, 2020, and it should have been gone before May 15th, 2020, that's what, 15, 16 days? So 2,500 times 16, and that's your fine. If you have 2 stoves in your store that should have been sold before May 15th, 2020, 2,500 times 2 times 16. So
And Chris,
this is no joke.
Yesterday, Chris, you called that, it is a business ending fine.
It could be. Absolutely.
Yep. So, you know, as we're talking about this, guys, there is severity. But as we're talking, we're a year out, you know, so plan ahead, be proactive. You know, HPVA is going to help come up with a checklist for what are the things you need to have in place if EPA comes. You know, if they show up at your door, don't kick them out, invite them in, show them that you're part of the solution. You know, this is a big deal. And I think at the end of the day, even though we have asked for sell-through and different things, at the end of the day, everybody wants clean air. We all want the same thing. We want clean air for the people that we love, but we also want to keep them warm and safe with products that perform really well. And I think that that's very important to not forget, that I think that we're playing the same game here. One thing I do want to throw out is just the other day, so Grant, Chris, and myself were on a podcast. If this has been helpful for you, we put together a podcast that's called 5 Things You Need to Survive NSPS. And so if you guys have a podcast catcher, do a search for the Fire Time podcast. And it's in iTunes and Spotify and any of those. And the latest episode is called 5 Things You Need to Survive NSPS. And you'll listen to a conversation very similar to this that's very practical at the retailer level. So I want to do this as we are rounding out here. Okay, we're going to answer one more question, and then we're going to do Final Jeopardy. We're going to go around and give one final thought. Okay. So the question right here is: after the deadline, Can we use non-compliant stoves as a display model as long as we market not for sale? Say that we get stuck with someone.
I think you're at risk doing
Yeah,
that.
get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Get the money for it. Move it off the showroom floor. Work with your manufacturer to get a step 2 version of that or another heater for the display purposes. That's not a clearly defined thing in the rule, and manufacturers have asked EPA for guidance on that. And in the absence of guidance, get rid of it.
Do you want that $2,500 per infraction per day fine? If not, I would get
Who
rid of it.
enforces these fines was a question that was. thrown
EPA.
out.
EPA.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
been clear.
Department of Justice.
Yeah.
It'd be EPA or DOJ versus you.
Yeah.
Load the little dots in.
They're like.
Yeah, they're liking it. Chris, they like you.
I'm not a Facebooker.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate everybody here that has been a part of this and listening to it. I want to go around the table, starting with Grant. Everybody, can you give us just a final thought about
Yeah.
this?
So I have, over the past few days, been the sky is falling guy. And in my life, in my journey in business, sometimes I've taken on that role to get a message out there. And I think that there's the sky is falling guy, and then there's the nonchalant, nothing's happening guy. We got to fall somewhere in between. It's not the sky is falling, but man, it starts now. I know it's getting warm. I know it's our off season, but you have to start planning this now. And man, you might have someone, if you sell barbecues or whatnot, see that outstanding deal you have in July and buy that wood stove and get it off the market. And that's what we all need to do.
I would say HPVA has tried very hard to get relief for this industry and have been working for more than 10 years on just this version of the NSPS. Use us as a resource. We are here for you. Call me, email us. My email is feinstein@hpva.org. Use us as a resource. Help us help you and reach out. That's what we're here for.
Get control of your inventory, green dot and blue dot every stove in your business today. Make sure that your salespeople and the people working for you understand what the green dot, blue dot is all about. My email is feinstein@hpva.org.
Here's the thing that I think about, and I teach this a lot whenever I talk to my sales teams, and it comes from a good friend of mine named Tim Rethlake. And every time he teaches, he puts up on a big screen the words, opportunity is nowhere. And with NSPS, don't get me wrong, there are gigantic concerns that can be business altering. And on one hand, we can look at that and say opportunity is nowhere. But by changing our perspective of the way that we see that, if you put one extra space in, it now says opportunity is now here. And that's the mentality that we have to take as dealers. Opportunity is now here. And I feel like if there's a message that our industry needs to understand is that what we're talking about is very serious. There are huge implications for it. But if you can attack this now and say, you know what, opportunity is now here, I think that we can actually win together as our industry becomes galvanized around NSPS, and I think that we can get to a great spot. So with all that said, everybody, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. Chris, Rachel, Grant,
Yeah,
holy
so
cow,
much
this was amazing.
Good.
We will do more of this, and I will put Rachel on the spot for more HPVA commitments as we do it.
I got you guys.
So thank you guys. I'm going to turn it off now. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
From Seattle. Out.
I'll answer this question. EPA